to Ev on Everything, a show that's getting closer and closer to actually being about everything. We're not quite there yet. Half of the title is true, at least. My name's Ev. You can find me on Twitter at Ev Buckley, and you can find the show on Twitter at Ev on Everything. We try to talk about current affairs and politics and culture, the things going on in our communities and our societies and the world in general that are of some kind of interest each week. It's a Tuesday, so we are gonna do a politics show. And about that, there's only one big thing going on in the world at the moment. And sometimes it feels like the only thing going on in the world at the moment is nothing. It is wonderfully quiet here in Glasgow. Now, I do live on a hill, on a quiet road, but the quietness that I'm talking about is a deeper thing than just the lack of noise in the immediate vicinity. The sounds you can hear that aren't birdsong do come from far, far away. The roads are empty, but the city feels content. Now, I know that it's not content underneath everything. I know there are people who are very unhappy with the situation that we're in, this lockdown. And there are people who are still working hard, and there are people, obviously, who are dying of coronavirus. None of those people are content. But the city was never just the sum of the experiences of the people in it. It has its own life and its own existence. It has its own mood. And right now it feels content. If that sounds a little bit idyllic, talking about the loudest thing in my environment being a light breeze, stripping a few petals of cherry blossoms in the front garden, don't worry. There's still children playing outside, for instance. They're making some noise. They weren't there before. And occasionally there's drunk people shouting good-natured insults over and back between the tower blocks behind my flat, reminding me where I am and how vibrant the city of Glasgow is, even when it's locked down. So this silence that I'm talking about, the quietness, is not normally there. This is a deliberate tamping down of the action of the city to make it into a calmer, gentler place. Usually there's a few too many cars outside and a few too few people. The kids are at school all day and then they do after school activities and their days are full, so they don't play in the streets around here. And of course, these days kids can't play the way they used to play in the past when I was a kid. The city's a busier, more dangerous place now in a way that it wasn't before. And those people who are out there, the cars that I'm talking about, they're passing through. They're on their way to somewhere else to do other things in other places. And they don't contribute to a sense of community in the streets outside. That's the kind of thing that makes it safe to have your kids around. When you know the people who are out there, and when there are witnesses, when there are other children. I'm 37 this week. And though I was young at the time, that means I have clear memories of the 1980s and the way that the world was before what you could call the rampant consumption nightmare that we live in now really took hold. Of course, we're all glad we don't live in an actual consumption nightmare. Tuberculosis is mostly gone from Western society. But there's another disease of the lungs out there that's doing this thing to us. It's taking us back in time. Very few people, especially people who grew up in Dublin, think of the 1980s as a good time to live in. For the most part, it was economic deprivation and a fairly bleak existence. But you could skateboard down a public street and not die. Some idiot teenager with four of their mates crammed in a 12-year-old Ford Focus with the exhaust pipe from a lawnmower wasn't waiting around every corner. And why weren't they? It's because that idiot didn't have a car back then. And what I'm getting at is, in our race to spend money on everything, to consume as much as we can, to move our lives over into paying for and absorbing things and media and the like, we've filled up the world. Okay? Now every idiot has a car. They're all driving them every day. because the car industry and the finance industry that supports it is better off when people are buying cars. And when people are buying cars, they're using them. Because the only reason not to use a car if you've already bought it, the only reason to use public transport if you have a car, is if the roads are full. Once the stress and once the slowness and the delay of trying to commute by car gets so bad, you'll stop using it. You'll get on the train or the tram then. But for the most part, if you're selling everyone cars, the roads are full. Right now, as we are, a child could skateboard all the way down the big hill that I live on and risk nothing more than a skinned knee. That's not just because there are no cars. It's because the ones that are there are driving slowly and carefully with no stress. They're not in a rush to get anywhere, and they're not trying so hard, you know? They're comfortable. So they're talking about opening up the lockdown, okay? They're talking about ending it. And basically, they're really talking about what they can get away with. Politicians will be looking at the impact on society, and the impact on society they're talking about is death. They are going to want to make sure that they can't be blamed for the deaths that will happen when they open up again, okay? And the plans to do that range from fairly sensible to pretty lunatic stuff, right? Ireland, for instance, increasing exercising distance to 5 kilometres from 2, that's happening today. And they're going to see what happens with that. And if it's okay, if they don't see an uptick in infections, they're going to push that out to 20 kilometres. That's really good. They're taking a careful wait and see approach. They're giving people a big bump to their quality of life, but they're not just opening everything wholesale. People are going to die when the lockdown ends, and they need to make absolutely certain that they handle it correctly. Contrast that with what's going on in America. You've got people literally being shot dead for imposing lockdown restrictions. A security guard in a store in Flint, Michigan, was murdered in premeditated murder when he refused someone access for not wearing a face mask. That person went away, came back with the rest of their family, and the security guard was shot in the head. That is the kind of resistance against lockdown that means that the lockdown doesn't really exist. It's only there on paper. The kind of people who would take any violent action, let alone murdering somebody, for saying wear a mask if you want to come into this shop, is the kind of person who is not following any lockdown of any kind. And this is happening all over America. Famous scenes of, again, people with guns occupying the Capitol building in Michigan is kind of illustrative of an attitude more than anything else. Okay? You have a situation where people are claiming that their guns are protecting their liberty, but obviously they're not using their guns. The legislature is not at gunpoint, and nobody is able to fire bullets at either the virus or at the websites telling them these are the rules that you need to live under. You can only fire bullets at people if you want to have any effect, and they are not doing that because that's not what those guns are for. They're a symbol, okay, and they are an expression of a mindset. You'll find this if you go looking for, more level-headed discussion about American gun laws. And if you see that the people who are in favor of maintaining gun laws as they are, just look for people commenting on the recent assault weapons ban in Canada next door. Okay? You'll find people saying their liberty is maintained at gunpoint. And people will point out to those people, what about the rest of the world? There are both heavily armed countries that have tyrannical governments, and there are countries that just don't have guns at all, essentially, where there's a perfectly functioning democracy and everyone's completely free. What is special and different about America that it needs guns to protect itself? And of course, It's the mentality that America is special and different that the gun is a signifier of. A guy with a rifle hanging out of him standing in a Capitol building is a metaphor for the fact that America works by democracy. And it's just got symbolic guns from the point of view of its constitution and so on that are never actually used. But the symbol is so powerful that it needs to be maintained. These people are resisting the lockdown, not because they need to resist it. They're not like business owners who are going to go out of business or people who've been laid off. That doesn't involve carrying a rifle, you know? These are people who believe in principle that the government should not be able to forestall any of their behaviors for any reason. And they link their idea of being free, their concept of freedom links very closely to taking risks. Okay? You are free if you are able and willing to risk danger or death or deprivation in the pursuit of what you want to achieve. If you're at no risk, you're not really free because you're not living at the limits of what's possible under the situation that you're in. You're cosseted and protected from everything, and being protected from everything means that you aren't out there experiencing it and so on. Okay? It's a similar thing that you'll find with adventure sports people and so on. If you give them safety equipment, they'll use it to expand the envelope of what's possible in terms of their performance. You know, racing drivers tend to do that too. You put them in a safer car, they drive faster, you know? These people are ensuring that there is essentially no lockdown in America, even though they say there is. And, you know, Michigan, with its gun-toting parliament occupiers, is now the worst affected state. It's taken over from New York. New York followed a more European style plan to lock everything down, or a more New Zealand style plan, or wherever you want to name. And it worked. Obviously, it worked at great expense to the city in lives and in economic damage, but it worked. New York is on the upslope, as it were. Michigan is not, and neither is a lot of the rest of the US. And states are talking about and actively doing kind of lifting the lockdown. This is madness. People are going to die in their tens of thousands because of this. There are now more people dead in America from this virus than from the Vietnam War. That is insane. That is not something that Americans should put up with. They shouldn't accept it. They should take powerful, concerted, strong action to stop this. But they are refusing to do so on principle. It's crazy. But they're talking about opening up the country. Here in Scotland, they're talking about the same thing, but they have a plan of stages. And they're doing a public consultation that you can go to a website and provide ideas and provide comment on other people's ideas to see if there's anything that you can contribute that might help with how the government is handling everything. And when they do open up, which they're not planning on doing right now, but when they do, they have a plan to isolate people with symptoms, test them, and where there are positive tests, to track and to isolate and support contacts of them. There's a detailed report that's been published, and it focuses on things like practicability and equality, because the Scottish Government is thinking about people and is aware that these restrictions and the illness itself affect different people differently. They know that some people will find it easy to isolate, some people it will be extremely difficult. They're going to offer support based on what's necessary to people that they ask to isolate. This is a constructive, level-headed and sensible approach. And I hope it works, because, you know, I have to live here. So someday, all this will pass. Okay? Someday, the lockdown will end in a few weeks or a few months, and we'll all be back in the world doing our thing. But we won't have given up all of these rules. We're going to have to create new rules to live by in the future. Okay? We're going to have to decide what effect those rules are going to have. And those rules can have a double effect. We can have them have more than just preventing the transmission of virus as the point of them. We can make changes to how we do things and how the economy works with a view to maintaining some of the things that we like about a society that's moving a little slower, that has a little bit less stress, it's a little bit less committed to spending money and buying things and buying media and so on at all costs. What can we save from the lockdown? What can we learn from it? And what kinds of things can we impose on society as rules that might have that positive effect? More on that after we do the podcast dance. Okay, yes, it is Ev on Everything, the show that you are listening to right now. You can find us on Twitter at Ev on Everything, and you can find me personally on Twitter at Ev Buckley. I produce the show, I write all of the scripts and the episodes. I obviously deliver them by telling them to this microphone and putting them up on the internet. I do all the editing, and I write, record, and produce the music. The artwork is by the inimitable and talented Laura Frame, and that's the entire show. What I want you to do in return for getting the show is rate it and review it and share it upon the internet. So tap the 5-star button wherever you're listening to this, send it to somebody to listen to who might like it, review it if you can, if you have anything at all to say. Write it down, especially on iTunes. These things help a great deal. And don't fall for the bystander effect. Don't wait for other people to do this. Go and do it yourself. Press that button now. I don't ask for anything else in return for putting all this stuff out there. If you're finding the show entertaining, if you're enjoying it, you can help me a great deal by liking and sharing and subscribing and so on. Please do it. I will be eternally grateful if you do. Anyway, I don't want to annoy you any further, so let's get back to the show. So yes, someday all this lockdown restricting must pass and we must go back to normal. We're going to get there by judicious application of rules that are going to protect us from the continued spread of the virus. And those rules should be and can be crafted to have desirable double effects. Okay? We have to create rules to live by in the future that protect us from this virus and from future viruses. And we have an opportunity to change our societies in doing so. We also, at the same time, have this shining example of how things can be if certain changes are made. You know, we can see the way society could be if we weren't doing some of the things that we have been doing too much of. Okay? So what do we want to save and what do we want to maintain, and what rules can we impose that can do that? Now, I don't have the time or the expertise to go into all of that in this episode. I'm not the man to ask about most things, but I do have some suggestions. You know, I do have some ideas. And number one among them is about the roads. The roads are quiet right now, and we all want that to continue. You know, nobody likes traffic. Nobody wants there to be traffic on the roads. When traffic is bad, the roads essentially don't do their job. They don't get you where you're going. They become an impediment rather than a functional piece of infrastructure. How good does it feel right now to have quiet roads, shorter, low stress journey times? Like I was saying earlier, this is like being 30 something years in the past when there just weren't that many cars because people didn't own them and people just lived differently and didn't take those journeys. It's incredible. All it took to sort out all of our traffic problems was to stop people from driving. Traffic was never caused, it turns out, by roadworks. It was never caused by idiots crashing their cars. It was never caused by bad driving or failure to follow the rules of the road or any of those things. It was just too many people. And when we stopped the journeys, the traffic vanished. We all get to love these short, low-stress journeys. The roads work now the way they were always intended to. You can drive out onto them, you can drive to where you're going, and you can get there. So what can we do to maintain that state of affairs, right? Well, air pollution is falling to unprecedentedly low levels in our cities. Because it was always true that the pollution of the air in cities was largely caused by traffic. Most cities in the Western world don't really have heavy industry in them anymore. They don't have smokestacks, they don't have emissions coming from anything except vehicle engines. And we were always tacitly saying we were happier with the health outcomes of air pollution in our cities than we were directly dealing with the question of how to reduce traffic on the roads. No one wanted the traffic, like I said, no one likes it. No one wanted the air pollution. But equally, nobody wanted to grasp this particular nettle. Now we've been forced to. And maybe one thing that we can do to fix all of this is when we return to allowing discretionary journeys, why not phase the resumption of car journeys and traffic based on air pollution levels? Why not say, we will allow traffic up to this level of air pollution and we'll monitor it every day. When it hits that level, that's it. No more. And if we want to keep that level down, okay, if we want to make sure that our pollution stays below the level where car journeys are acceptable, we need an all fronts kind of advance. We need to be using public transport where it's possible and where it's easy, and even where it's not easy. We need to be walking and cycling. We need to be limiting journeys, just not going places we don't need to go, or going to alternatives that don't involve adding to traffic black spots. Okay? But on top of that, we can make these journeys in electric vehicles, for instance. You know, right now those are a rich person thing. But why not put in car clubs with electric vehicles that anybody can use so that journeys are still available to people who absolutely need them, but you still have that little break on going and doing it, same as going to the supermarket now involves a long time queuing, and that's making people go once a week or once every 2 weeks because it's undesirable. Tell people, of course you can drive into the city, you just have to do it in an electric car. And then people will be like, okay, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll go in once a week or once a month or whatever it is for shopping or for work or for whatever. And maybe because nightlife and restaurants and things are already so centered around alcohol in this country, maybe we'll find that the businesses that are reliant on that kind of transportation don't actually take the hit that we thought they would. People keep going into the city. They keep going in, but they go in on public transport and they stay in. They do their shopping and they have a day out. We are building back up from completely closed down businesses. And how we build back up and where we build back up to is an open question. So while you can't say to a business, we're going to change all of these laws and I'm sorry, but this is going to ruin your business plan, you're going to go out of business. You can say to them, we are going to reopen the city in stages, in a phased manner with these rules. And if you want your business to work, we will give you support in adhering to those rules and see where we get. Maybe phasing back in traffic and city traffic journeys in cars underneath an air pollution cap is a good thing. And you could help if you go a bit further. Why not pedestrianize while we're at it? Why not just say, these roads aren't going to open? You know? Let people find their own way around these things, but just say, we're just not going to open these streets around this area and see how we go. There wasn't anyone here before anyway, okay? They're allowed to come back, but they're not allowed to drive back. You can do all the standard stuff where you allow people in at certain times for deliveries and so on, where you allow public transport to move through the place. But in the main, you just don't allow the whole thing to get choked up with private cars. That would keep the air pollution down. That would help with keeping journeys down. People wouldn't necessarily drive if they can't drive all the way door to door. People would choose other options for, bulk carrying and things like that. You would find that people would build their solutions based on the constrictions that you put in place. Tell them they're not allowed to drive down that road anymore. They will find other ways. Cities pedestrianizing areas is completely routine. It's done all the time. But now we have an opportunity to pedestrianize in a way that is more radical, for instance, and that is more effective. Okay? There are large parts of the centre of Glasgow that have car accessible roads, but essentially almost no traffic. Glasgow's road system is not necessarily particularly well designed. There's no reason not to close off those streets that have a few cars go through them per hour, and that only really exist as parts of one-way filters or for people who feel the need to drive right up to certain office buildings and so on. They do not need to be traffic roads. We perceive them to be necessary because we look at this whole thing as being an immovable object. There have to be cars, but there don't. Why don't we just pedestrianize them right now and say, when we open up, we're not opening this. Businesses, deal with it. Find a way to get your people in here without driving right up to the door. They can drive not right up to the door. They can still drive into the city, but they can't drive right here. Speaking of which, why not make car journeys into the city a business expense? Just say, if you're running a business in the city, you have X number of car journeys per year or per month or whatever it is. You can't have any more than that. Now, that would be very, very difficult to enforce right now. You'd almost be expecting it to be a honor system, okay, where you're just like, we're going to check a couple of people, just to make sure, TV license style, but we don't really have a way to stop somebody driving into work and then, lying to their employer and saying, oh man, I got the train. Fine. But with this new reopening of the economy, we can start the kind of blue skies thinking where we put rules in right now that we can't enforce yet. But we aspire to enforce them correctly and we aspire to bring everyone into line with them. The reality is we can't enforce a lot of laws that are just accepted because breaking them feels wrong. It's true that they do monitor things like imperial weights and measures in pubs, and hypothetically, if you had underpouring glasses for your pints in your pub, someone might come along and fill up one of the glasses and throw you in jail or whatever. But seriously, that is a law that you could get around, as would be watering down your booze, There is no way to enforce it other than going and looking at people doing it and saying, haha, I caught you. And yet the law exists and it's almost universally adhered to. There's no reason we can't say to a business, look, you only get 10,000 car journeys per year for however many employees, and that's it. No more, and that's all. So apply them judiciously, find out who, takes public transport and so on, find out who needs to drive, find out who can avoid driving, find out who can drive at different times of day. Maybe we tell them you get 10,000 rush hour journeys, but after 11 a.m. and after 7 p.m., you can have as many journeys as you want. So you might be saying to people, hey, listen, have the morning at home. Don't worry about rush hour. If you need to drive in for 11 o'clock and work at home until then. Creative strategies where you put the rules in place and you let businesses and people and individuals find solutions to keep working around them. Because we have to invent the rules, we get to invent them with these double effects. If we didn't need to invent the rules, if there was nothing forcing us to do this, then we wouldn't have the push factor to deal with all of the negativity, all the blowback, all of the problems. Someone would say, it is a total waste of all of our time and effort to limit driving. Okay? You try to put rules about when people can and can't drive and where they can and can't go because you care about air pollution and you care about traffic and you care about road traffic accidents and deaths on the roads and all these things. Stopping driving is impractical. It's a waste of time. That's true. It is. But we have to do it. We don't have a choice. This virus is making us curtail journeys and transportation and travel. They're curtailed right now. We can add them back in whatever amount for whatever reason we like. Maybe we need to do some interesting thinking about that. So obviously the lockdown is inherently bad. This amount of curtailment of our freedoms and liberties, of our economy, of individual businesses, the damage that it does to our mental health and our culture, all of this has to come to an end before the damage gets too bad, before everything becomes changed beyond recognition and some things just don't come back. And we've already lost a lot in the years that I've been alive, things that used to be there that aren't anymore. Some of those things are individual businesses. Some of them are sectors of culture, you might say. One of the things that I wish was still here now that I'm old enough to appreciate it is high quality live music in bars and nightclubs. It used to be that if you went to a club or a bar or even a pub, you could expect to an extent that there would be maybe a house band, for instance. Maybe there would be guest or touring musicians playing club sets. Maybe there would just be a single player playing in the corner but playing exceptionally well. There was a level of talent on display that's lost now. These days you do not expect to go into a bar or a pub and find a very high quality live band. There'll be a jukebox if you're lucky, but probably it's just somebody playing Spotify behind the bar. We've lost something when we lost that. Not just the culture, but the support of musicians. It used to be that if you were in, a touring band or if you were in a recording band, you could also play in pubs and clubs for money. If you played a couple of nights a week in a couple of different bands, that might just pay your rent and bills, a few gigs, 6 or 8 a month or something like that, because these guys would be playing all the time, because pubs and clubs would have them. And those musicians are out there. Orchestras are full of musicians talented enough to do this stuff, indie rock bands are too. There's a lot of people out there who can play a set. But these days we only really expect to see that in specialist nightclubs like jazz clubs, There's a lot of people out there who can play live electronics, live electronics that would drop your jaw and open your eyes. And yet they can't play live sets, or at least They can't play live sets in regular, bars and nightclubs because it's not expected. It's assumed that that won't be going on. And when you do see people performing, a lot of the time, it's just not that good quality. It's the phrase, the pub band that we have here in the UK. I don't know if they have it wherever you're listening, but a pub band is a phrase for a band that can only play pubs, essentially. You're talking about a band that does mostly covers, mostly okay, not because they're necessarily bad at music, but because there's a standard that they have to get up to, and that's enough. In terms of rehearsals, in terms of, the amount of effort and investment that they make in this, they're more like a hobby than like the real thing. Okay? And it might be nice to try to reclaim a little bit of that when we open back up. The musicians are certainly there. The bars and pubs are certainly there. What if we said the bars and pubs that get to open up have to have live music on? We can't open everything at once. We have to phase and stagger this. We can't just say, Tuesday 2 weeks, the pubs are open, end of story. That would be carnage, counterproductive, and it would be a very bad experiment in terms of trying to find out what it is that, or how the virus reacts to us doing this. It would be too late if we turned out to have made a mistake. We are going to be opening some, but not other places. So why not say, you can open back up if you also employ musicians? You're not going to be wanting for musicians to play in your club at the moment. They are hurting for money and they are ready to go. They're dying to get out there. So if you're willing to have a little stage in the corner with a little PA system and bring in musicians, a couple of times a week to play in your bar, you get to be open. With all the usual, distancing guidelines that people are expecting. They're talking about prioritizing outdoor seating. They're talking about, table service only pubs and things like that. That's all fine. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to choosing which places open, choose the ones that have the broader appeal to the economy and provide a better cultural output. If you want to open your nightclub, say, that's fine, okay. You can open your nightclub again, but we expect to have live music. We expect a band, put a local funk band in there for a couple of hours before the DJ takes over at 11 o'clock. Put, an indie rock night on with actual indie rock bands before the DJ takes over at 1 a.m. or whatever it is. The idea that you go to a nightclub and just start dancing at 10 p.m. and don't stop until the end, that's wannabe rave culture. That's this ridiculous idea that everyone is 18 years old and mad out of it and is only interested in doing loads of pills, dancing like a lunatic, embarrassing themselves and forgetting it all the next morning. And clubs are strangely designed that way these days. Small, tiny, uncomfortable seating areas a lot of the time. Far fewer tables than is necessary because they want people standing and dancing and drinking, And this makes money for club owners. Doesn't make a lot of money for the staff or the management or the people who actually matter. But if you've invested in it and you're pulling the money out, the more people drink, the better, So you want them up and dancing all night. You don't want them comfortably sitting in a, nice couch with a pint that they're going to sip away at for an hour, because that's not good for the, money-making side of things. But clubs and pubs and bars have a cultural side to them too. They are a resource and an amenity for the community. If you want to open up, show us that you are giving back to the musical community that is providing all the music, by the way, that you are playing in your club for people to come and dance to. You're just, using a DJ instead of anyone else because it's a faff to do a live act and, it involves a lot more headaches. Well, it also involves paying musicians, paying sound staff, nurturing talent, you know, and providing opportunities. This is not necessarily an easy thing to do, but we have an opportunity now because they're all out of work. You know? If you told someone to do this beforehand, say we're taking away your club license unless you take on if what's essentially several extra members of staff. You know, you'd be told there's no way to make it work economically, we're not doing it. Okay? And, you know, the pushback politically would be pretty strong and it would never get off the ground. But now, you have this big carrot of being in the first wave of people to open, of being the people who can stay open the most or the longest, or however it is that we stagger this. You can be at the forefront of it if you agree to give back to the music community. So why not do it? There's nothing to stop it happening. Everything is there. You know? No one's going to say no if you say to somebody, hey, listen, we only get to open if we do some live sound. Is there any live sound people out there who can do this? Any hire companies who have a ton of kit standing, you know, idle because no one's putting on gigs right now? Now's the time when you can do it quickly and easily without any breaks on the process. And wouldn't it be wonderful to go back to a situation where you can fully expect, you know, a club set from band? You can expect people to be playing in the corner. You can expect the music in the pub that you're in to be live and high quality with professional musicians who are being paid. Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it be so much better than a jukebox playing the same old rubbish you've heard a million times before because it's the least offensive? Wouldn't it be better than Sky News on a TV in the corner? I think it should be an absolute rule for pubs and bars, and I think it should be a broader, more general principle. If you want to open back up, show us that you are going to provide more to the community. Why should we pick you over somebody else to be part of the advance guard of reopening of the cultural industry? Show us that you're going to do more than just make money for yourself. Well, I think I'm going to put that one into the suggestion box for the Scottish economy. And I'm getting more and more, the more I think about it, I'm getting very grateful that a government exists that has that suggestion box out for me. I can't imagine it existing south of the border here. I can't imagine it existing in a lot of other places. But around here, it really feels like people will listen. I don't know if they'll do anything, but they'll listen. I'm going to make that suggestion because I can. Anyway, we've had about enough of me for today, I think. Maybe you haven't, but there are other episodes in the past for you to go back and listen to if you need more Ev in your life. It has been Ev on everything. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a wonderful show, I think. It's been a positive show where we've talked about how awesome various things were. It's not always a positive thing to be talking about current affairs. It's nice to get through one where we're thinking about good things, especially with the way the world is at the moment. Thank you so much for listening. We are going to be back later in the week with a curtailed episode that we are hoping will go out on Thursday, but it might be Saturday because of the bank holiday, and also because I'm turning 37. And you know, we shouldn't lose sight of how great birthdays are sometimes. I'm not a big fan of birthdays and birthday parties and so on, but it's nice to have a day for yourself, isn't it? So yeah, gonna be doing that. Watch out, watch your podcast apps that you are subscribing in and liking in, I hope, for another episode later this week. Thanks so much. Bye bye.